harmony at once, and then you can win.
Good afternoon, and welcome to 90 Years of Clear Weather. Thank you for joining me today for this exciting afternoon where I get to talk about one of my all-time favorite pieces and the journey it's had since it was written nearly 100 years ago. Irving Berlin's Blue Skies has been performed countless times, but today I will focus on the seminal recordings and performances over the years that have made the song a classic. You may be sitting there wondering, who are these people? And then you might be thinking, if you recognize any faces, well, why are they sharing a screen together? Well, the man in the middle is Irving Berlin, the composer of Blue Skies, and sharing the screen with him up here is Belle Baker, Ella Fitzgerald, Maxine Sullivan, and Willie Nelson. And all of them have recorded performances of Blue Skies and put their own unique spin on it. Blue Skies debuted in 1926 on December 28th in the musical Betsy at the New Amsterdam Theater in New York. The plot of Betsy revolves around Mama Kitzel, who refuses to let any of her children get married until her unlucky loved daughter, Betsy, finds a husband. Belle Baker, the actress in the titular role, became concerned during production that the musical didn't have a show-stopping Belle Baker number. Betsy's producer, Lawrence Ziegfeld, reached out to friend and collaborator Irving Berlin in hopes that he could write a standout song for the musical. Berlin and Ziegfeld had a previously established relationship, as Berlin had composed pieces for Ziegfeld's Follies in 1919. Although Berlin had a short turnaround time, he agreed to compose the piece for Baker. Unbeknownst to Rodgers and Hart, the big Broadway names of the time who composed the music and lyrics for Betsy, Berlin's song was incorporated into the musical. On opening night, Belle Baker performed the tune 23 times. On the 24th time, she forgot the lyrics. It's rumored that Ziegfeld shone the spotlight on Berlin, who stood up and helped Belle Baker finish the song. Although Blue Skies was well received, the musical overall was unsuccessful and closed just a month later on January 29th, 1927, after a total of 39 performances. Blue Skies remains its lasting gem due to its message and malleability. Since its Broadway debut, Blue Skies has been performed and adapted by a multitude of artists. However, even though the tune has been transformed from its Broadway origins, which we'll explore today, the message has never been lost. In the 1920s, the message of Blue Skies was one audiences related to and yearned to hear. Today, Blue Skies remains a positive and powerful message. In 1927, Josephine Baker recorded a version of Blue Skies. Her recording closely resembles the Broadway original, which is why I wanted to share it with you today. The intro, which we'll listen to shortly, is a trumpet playing the last 8 measures of the song, which is a pretty standard introduction for jazz pieces. Baker includes the Broadway intro, I'm blue just as blue as I could be, which is dropped in the later versions that we'll explore as we progress through today's presentation. The form of the piece is a traditional jazz form, A-A-B-A, the verse in the A section, refrain in the B section. And the solos are pretty typical to the way solos would occur in jazz music, with trumpet in the A section, something that we will expand upon as we move forward in today's presentation and see what artists do with these. 10 years later, in 1937, Maxine Sullivan recorded her own approach to blue skies. Maxine Sullivan was born Marietta Williams in Homestead, Pennsylvania. Some of you may recognize the name Maxine Sullivan due to her famous recording of Loch Lomond. Maxine Sullivan's approach is representative of the early swing period. During this time, as you'll hear in a little bit through her version, vocalists begin to take on a more of an improvisatory role. They start to embrace the qualities of instruments and what the instruments have been doing with improv. In Maxine Sullivan's version, there's some rhythmic changes, and she has a more free and relaxed approach to the tune compared to Baker's version that we just listened to. Throughout the piece, she has sporadic embellishments on the melody, which add some color to the piece. The tempo is slower than Baker's version, and it's much slower than Ella Fitzgerald's version, which I'll perform in a little bit. One aspect of Sullivan's version that is really interesting is her use of melodic inversions. At the top, you can see the first 8 of the original melody. One example of a melodic inversion that she does is in Blue Skies, instead of going from A to C, she goes A, up a minor, third, 2 skies, adding color. And then this is another example of a melodic inversion she does throughout the piece. I'm going to be performing Blue Skies influenced by Maxine Sullivan's approach. So see if you can note some of these changes as I perform Blue Skies. Blue skies smiling at me. as the vocalist vehicle for improvisation. So using nonsensical lyrics and using the scale, harmonic elements to again hint at the melody and make it somewhat recognizable. Traditional to the bebop style, Ella Fitzgerald's version embraces a fast tempo. Also, she has a different approach in the chord progressions that she modifies. Ella Fitzgerald's version is widely known and performed often, and it's influenced many singers, including me. I'm going to perform a version that incorporates some of her stylistic approaches, such as the scat singing. Two decades later, in 1978, Willie Nelson shocked audiences with his version of Blue Skies. His version marks the return to the deliberate simplicity of the tune, as we heard in Josephine Baker's approach. In 1978, Willie Nelson produced an album, Stardust, which consisted of his 10 favorite songs, all of which were Tin Pan Alley songs, which was what the big surprise was to his country music fans. bebop, and scat in Ella Fitzgerald. Willie Nelson's version is significant because it brought back the music of Tin Pan Alley to a new audience. Maxine Sullivan and Ella Fitzgerald really pushed the boundaries on what could be done with Blue Skies and what was possible for a vocalist. So it represents the liberties artists can take in jazz. What's so powerful about what Willie Nelson did is that he brought this tune, Blue Skies, back full circle. It hadn't really been done as simply as he did it since its original debut in 1926. Nelson helped solidify Blue Skies as a cross-genre hit, which appealed to modern audiences. Although there are multiple versions of Blue Skies, I selected these three today as ones that have really influenced me in my singing. Despite all the differences and contrasting versions of Blue Skies, the sentiment of Blue Skies, nothing but blue skies from now on, has always shown through. I appreciate you coming today to 90 years of clear weather, blue skies throughout the ages. A reception will follow the presentation, so feel free to ask questions afterwards. But now I'd like to introduce Mary Paige for her presentation.
Sit here. Stop moving your head. Stop moving your head.
Hola a todos, vamos a hablar sobre el flamenco y la evolución y la comida y también la música de English. Right, English. Okay, so let's start over. Hi, my name is Mary Paige Rodgers. This afternoon, I'd like to talk to you about my thesis that I've been working on all semester, Flamenco, a Secret Island. Now, it's not really an island, and we're going to talk about how this music evolved throughout history and really its comparisons between where it was in Spain and the rest of Europe. So let's get started. My big question today is, we all know about Chopin and we know about Schubert and Schumann and how they were really famous for taking their folk traditions like Polish mazurkas, like German lieder, and they made them very internationally popular by arranging them into character pieces or into Chopin's mazurkas, and everyone loved them. Now my question here today is, if flamenco is the folk tradition of Andalucía, a region in Spain, why didn't it follow that same path? Why didn't it influence A, the rest of Spain, or B, the rest of Europe as a whole, like mazurkas and lieder did? So that's my big question for today, and we're going to break it down. So here's an overview of how we're going to try and answer this question today. First up, we're going to talk about some historical events that carved the path for flamenco's specific and strange evolution. And then after that, we'll talk about some music theory, the musical components like rhythm, chord progressions, vocal style, all that good stuff that really make flamenco an art on its own that is very different from the rest of Europe, as you'll see. After I talk about the theory, I'll be able to have you listen to those differences as I perform Columpiar by Paco de Lucia y Malagueña arranged by Ernesto Lecuona. Okay? And then finally, I'll wrap it up with talking about gypsy culture. Now, gypsy culture is a huge part of flamenco's evolution because they are the people that ingrained flamenco into their lives, into their culture, and perform this music every day. So let's get started. Now, we know we're in Spain, but where exactly in Spain are we? We're talking about Andalucía. It's the southernmost region of Spain, and it's highlighted in red right there. This green map, you can see the regions broken down kind of like provinces. And the most popular ones for flamenco's origin and evolution are going to be Sevilla and Granada. Now, I'm just going to give you a little visual tour so we kind of know where we are, get our bearings a little bit. This is, a nice urban plaza in Sevilla, very nice. You can tell that wealth is in this area. And also in that area and the villages where people live, it's very beautiful. It kind of reminds me of Greece a little bit. But you've also got the other side. These are Los Pueblos Gitanos, the gypsy villages. these are where the gypsies lived. Now, this is a current photo. You can see this is where they reside on this hill there. Back in the 1500s, when the gypsies first settled into Spain, they were cave dwellers. They were nomadic cave dwellers. A very interesting way of life, and it's really what carved out flamenco's evolution different than the rest of Europe. So keep that in mind. Here's another picture. Same type of deal in Granada, close up. This is the living conditions we're dealing with here. So just keep it in mind. It's a little mental image for later. We'll talk about more gypsy culture later on in the presentation. So I'd like to get started also with going through some historical events that happened that, like I said, carved the path for flamenco's evolution. First up, way back in the 6th century, we've got Jews migrating from the kingdom of the Visigoths. As you can see, they moved from the north towards the south, eventually settling in Andalucía, which is the region where flamenco was born. Now, they were escaping religious persecution, and so that's something they're bringing with them as they settle into Andalucía, and they're escaping the Visigoths of the Roman Empire. Next up, a couple hundred years later, we're in 711 AD, we've got the Moorish invasion. They're not coming from the north, they're coming from the south in North Africa. You're getting a lot of Moorish, a lot of Arabic cultural influences seeping into southern Spain here, and most of them invading northward, but a lot of Moorish people ended up settling in Andalucía. Fast forward a bit, 1492, who do we think of? Christopher Columbus, the guy who sailed to the wrong place. But we think of Spain, we think golden age of Spain, we think of colonization. Look at all those ships. We've got power, we've got resources, we know where to get them. But with that comes power, and after power, we get risk. Now, the risks include battles, power struggles, wars, internationally between countries in Europe, Spain included. We get 80 Years' War, Franco-Spanish War, Spanish War of Succession, a lot of political turmoil. We've got the religious turmoil from the Jews coming in, from the Visigoths. There's a lot going on in Andalucía, and they're all caught right in the middle. Now, let's fast forward a bit to the 17th, 18th century, okay? We're looking at the Andalucía demographic now, where we have our Jewish cultural influences, our Moorish Arabic cultural influences. They combine to create the gypsy culture. You can see that picture I was talking about, the cave-dwelling nomadic people, right there. See that cave? I mean, perfect example. And that's some gypsies dancing flamenco, having a great time, clapping, and we'll talk about more gypsy culture later on, but some great images to tell you kind of what we're dealing with here. So now that we've seen Andalucía gypsy culture in the 17th and 18th centuries, let's take a look at the European classical music that was occurring at the same time. I've got two images here. The first one is of Friedrich Chopin, and he was writing his mazurkas at this time, and so you can see their dance pieces. Those were his, folk traditional dance pieces that he made wildly popular throughout Europe. And on the right, we've got another comparison here. We see Schubert's Lieder music that I said earlier took folk poems from Germany, and he made them into piano pieces, and they got rearranged throughout Europe and became wildly popular as well. So let's ask again, why didn't this happen in Andalucía with flamenco? And now we're starting to get an idea why. So let's go over some music theory. We all love music theory. Now, the first thing we're going to analyze with flamenco today is the rhythm. So let's take a look. Tienes buen compás, tienes buen compás. What does that mean? You've got good rhythm. You've got good rhythm. Kind of like a jazz player would say, oh, he feels it. Yeah, he's got it. He's got it. So now we have all of these. There's 4 trees, a bunch of branches. All of these are different variations of compás. That's a lot. I mean, for one genre of music, that's a ton. But don't worry, we're not going to go over every single one today and put you to sleep. We're going to go over a couple of these really popular ones. Now, I've stripped it down. I've got this great chart here. It's just boxes and dots, no time signatures, no notes, nothing like that. It's easier to understand. So I'm going to start here with kind of explaining what the rhythmic structure is of flamenco. Notice I don't say time signature. They don't have them. They've got rhythmic structures. Think of this row of 12 boxes as a measure, okay? 12 beats in a measure, not 4, not 3, not 6, we got 12. And that happens in every flamenco piece you hear. Now the dots are going to be So the easiest one to kind of start out with to kind of get your bearings here is going to be the fandango rhythmic structure. Think of the fandango compas as kind of a 2 6/8 right next to each other. We know 6/8 as kind of like a waltz. So 1 2 3 4 5 6, right? And it keeps going. So if we double that, clapping a fandango rhythm is actually kind of easy. It's just groups of threes. 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10 11 12. It repeats, they do their dancing, they're good to go. Now, they get a lot more complicated as it goes on. I'm going to show you the soleado one, which is very popular flamenco rhythmic structure in song form. And things are a little bit different. We've got no accent on the one, so the one is just felt. And so we've got 1 2 3 4 5 6 8 9 10 12 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10 11 12. And so that's a lot of syncopation going on, right? It's kind of, that's a lot, but you have to think that there's no time signature, no one has a time signature written down in front of them on their music stand because they don't have music stands. The second thing is that rhythmic structure right there is just one component of the entire rhythm that's going on during a flamenco performance. You have to think about the people that are there. You've got the singer who's got their own compas. You've got the ladies in the back doing palmas, clapping, right? They've got their own compas, probably different variations, whichever one they felt like doing. You've got the guitar player doing his thing, and you've got the ladies stomping, dancing. That's like 6 different rhythms going on at once. So that raised a red flag for me saying, this is probably why flamenco didn't really spread towards Northern Europe, because that's pretty complicated, honestly. I mean, it's crazy. But the next thing we're going to look at is some chord progressions that occur in flamenco music. I made up a chart here that kind of compares typical Western, I say Western, European, minor and major keys, C major, A minor, keep it simple. To the right of that, we've got their scale degrees with the Roman numerals underneath, okay? And then to the right of that, we've got a typical chord progression within that key. So C major, 1 4 5 1, beautiful, perfect authentic cadence, you're done, okay? If we look at this bottom row here, the typical Andalusian key/mode, notice how I don't just say key, I also say mode, is because they don't really have, key signatures either. And so the mode that they use, that they feel in their pieces when they write them and when they perform them, is Phrygian on E. So you're basically taking E on the piano, go up to the next E, all white keys. That's going to leave you with this cadence here, flat 2 to 1. Now, I don't know about you, but I can't really think of any, popular European composers that are going to end their grand masterpiece on a flat 2 to 1. That's not going to happen. In flamenco, that happens 9 times out of 10. And so that's a huge differentiating factor between, most Western music and flamenco music, is that they have the guts to do this. The flat 2 to 1 is, it's very Moorish in influence, very Arabic style. And the rest of Europe was like, oh, I'm not doing that. I'm not going to write a piece with that in it. And so it's just something to think about. The next thing we're going to analyze is the melody. Now finally we get some common ground with the rest of Europe here, okay? We've got melismas. Now melismas are when you have one syllable with a ton of notes attached to it, or more than one technically. Now we can date melismas all the way back to Gregorian chant, which was happening in Western Europe, a long, long time ago. And so that's kind of a common factor, kind of home base here that we can say, okay, here's one thing they have in common with the rest of Europe in flamenco. But you gotta remember that flat 2 to 1 cadence we talked about, it applies to the melody as well. And so you have to think, if these singers are doing melismas going flat 2 to 1, flat 2 to 1, flat 2 to 1, it's sounding very Arabic, it's sounding very Moorish, it's sounding not like Gregorian chant or the rest of Western music culture. And so it's kind of a double-edged sword, it's common ground, but also apply the theory and you get totally different sounds. So next up, we've got an analysis of our vocal styles between Western Europe and flamenco music. So we've got the feelings. How are they feeling when they sing? This is going to dictate their vocal style, right? Love that guy. And so we've got the building blocks here, kind of, of how they sing. And so you have to think about each cantaor, or flamenco singer, right, take with them since they're a child, grief, pain, exile, prejudice, discrimination, everything they've been through throughout history, that has to do with Andalucía. That's just the culture there. And so if you have not experienced one of these 5 things in your life, you technically can't really feel or be a flamenco singer. You just can't. If you don't have it, you don't got it. And so you hear in these vocal styles, you can almost just see the raspiness coming out of that guy's voice. I mean, it's very raspy, it's raw, it's emotional, it's you might think it's out of tune, but it's not, because it's just that Phrygian flat 2-1. It's really close. You get some quarter tones in there, very Arabic sounding. So crazy different from, you get Italian opera in the 18th century, very conservative, very it's just very mild compared to this style of singing where they're not afraid to show their emotion. And so I'm going to show you here this is a excerpt of a mining folk melody from Andalucía. It's this guy, he's saying, I don't know if it's the lead or the sorrow I have. Here inside I feel a knot that leaves me without breath and kills me little by little. Melodramatic, super sappy, we get it. But that's actually kind of literal. That probably happened to that guy because he was probably working in a mine, couldn't breathe, and it was killing him little by little. And so you have to think about that when you think about 18th century, Italian opera writers, and they're writing the lyrics. Have they felt what they're writing about? These guys always did. They always felt what they were writing their music about, and it showed in the vocal style and the melody and everything. So that's a big differentiating factor. Now let's do kind of a recap. That was a lot of theory, that was a lot of stuff. So we compared Western classical music with flamenco. We've got our rhythmic structures, compás versus normal time signatures, 4/4, 3/4, 6/8. We've got our chord progressions, the Phrygian mode versus typical major and minor keys. And then we get our melodies, like melismas on Phrygian, which sound a lot different than melismas on typical keys in Western Europe. And then we get our vocal styles. Flamenco is breathing, it's harsh, it's emotional. And Western Europe, more conservative, more refined. So now, we're going to apply that theory to some pieces that we're going to perform for you. The guy on the left, his name is Papa de Lucia. He wrote Cumpleaños Numbers 1 and 2, which are very short kind of introductory pieces to flamenco singer, and I can't sing like that, so you're just getting the guitar today. But the next guy is Ernesto Lecuona. He's actually Cuban, but he arranged Malagueña in a way that a solo guitarist could play it. And you still get the different, scale degrees and the chord progressions, same stuff that I was dealing with. So, without further ado, I'm going to perform these for you, and then we'll move on with our last point. technique, and you heard that Andalusian, 2-to-1 on the Phrygian scale. You heard the F to the E chord, very strong, and you feel like it wants to go somewhere, right? Because we're used to 5-to-1. So you hear that E and you're like, oh my gosh, go to A minor, but it's not gonna. It ends on E. And so that's super important when you're thinking about flamenco and its evolution versus what the rest of Western music already has ingrained in their musical culture. They're not really gonna be digging that because it's like, where is it going? But it ends on that open E, and the dancers are holding and they're clapping, and it's just stoic, right? So that's what you have to think about there. Now, let's talk about some gypsy culture. I had the great opportunity to talk to a famous flamenco guitarist. His name was Ricardo Moran. He's from the DC metro area. Great guy, very nice. We talked for at least a couple hours over the phone, but the most important thing I could take away from this interview was his perspective personally, because he has friends who are still currently gypsies. Gypsies aren't just a historical myth, right? They are here today, they're in the United States even. His personal experience with gypsies, like this quote here, what was he doing? He was playing a gig in DC, right, a couple years ago even, and a bunch of gypsies, they brought their families, they brought their kids, they came like a horde, they destroyed the restaurant, tracked water through the place. He says they do not behave like normal people. I mean, and so this happened in Europe too back in the day, not just a couple of years ago, but this happened back in Europe when flamenco was rising as what I like to call an art form. Back then they didn't, but this happened in Europe, and they had this prejudice against gypsies. They really did. They don't follow rules, regulations, or social norms, and they end up excluding themselves from society. That's really important because with gypsies, they are flamenco. Gypsies don't just play flamenco, they are flamenco. It is who they are. And so flamenco got excluded from society as well. And so if you ask a gypsy, yeah, social injustice, yeah, I experienced that. Discrimination, that too. Income disparity, oh god, yeah. They don't care. They're not gonna move, they're not gonna find better opportunities. They're fine where they are. If someone kicks them out of a restaurant, they're gonna go to another one and start doing the same stuff, okay? This is how they are as a people, as a nomadic, used to be cave-dwelling people, okay? And flamenco is their culture. It's what they performed, and it's how they are as people. And so you have to think about that in contrast with the rest of 18th century Western music, very refined, sitting in the parlor, oh, good job, but with flamenco, it's like, oh, we got kicked out of a bar at 2 in the morning. Okay, let's go to the next place. But it really started growing as an art form. It's a beautiful, beautiful art form that the rest of Europe does not feel was the case. And even the rest of northern Spain, they were not having it. In fact, there was a movement called anti-fligismos, anti-flamenco. They were just not having it with these gypsies, honestly. And so here's a great picture. A bunch of little kids on a hill, probably in Sevilla, that looks just like it, but don't quote me on that. Flamenco is not just music. This kid is flamenco, so is that kid, so is that kid. It is what they're born with, it's in their culture, it's who they are. And they don't want to move, they don't want to move. They don't want to have other countries be influenced by their beautiful, raw, impactful, emotional art form. They don't care. Not at all. And so this is one of the huge reasons why flamenco did not influence the rest of Europe and did not evolve in a typical pattern as Chopin's mazurkas and Schubert's Lieder did, because it's who they are and they don't want to move. They don't want to go anywhere. So we revisit our big question, right? We've got Chopin's mazurkas and Schubert's Lieder, and they followed a great path towards international fame. Flamenco did not. Why? Because of certain historical events that carved their path to make them have a very peculiar evolution, a lot of persecution, a lot of prejudice, right? Then we got our music theory analysis, that Phrygian 2-to-1 that the rest of Europe was not going to go near, crazy rhythm structures that were just too complicated to fathom. And then we have our gypsy culture. Flamenco is who we are, we're not changing, go do what you want, okay? And so I'd like to thank you for kind of enveloping yourself in another culture that most people don't even talk about. You pick up the Oxford, edition of Western music history, that big thick book. How many pages are on flamenco? 1 out of thousands. So I really appreciate you guys kind of opening your minds mingle with us and ask us questions if you want. So thank you very much.